I would like to welcome all of you to, well, first to planet Earth. You are here, but you probably were aware of that. Now we'll be just a little more specific and invite and welcome you to U of M's new Sustainability Lecture Series, which is co-sponsored by the Environmental Studies Program and the Sustainable Business Council. And the theme of this series is Will Work for Sustainability, Creating Jobs through Sustainable Development. And I hope you all saw that big beautiful rainbow over Mount Sentinel today. The rainbow is sort of the universal symbol of hope, and I can't think of anything more hopeful than striving towards sustainability, as the community of Missoula has been striving more and more these recent years to do, and the university also trying to do its part in striving towards sustainability. So hopefully you'll hear about more of those efforts in this sustainability series tonight and over the coming weeks, because this is just the first of the series. It will be every Wednesday night from now through December 1st. It's also a university class, and the students will have a couple of more class meetings after the public lecture series is over. So don't forget, students, you get to hang around another week or two after everybody else. We hope that this sustainability lecture series will accomplish several things. And for those of you who are wondering, who is this person? I'm Vicki Watson, a professor of environmental studies, and I'm hoping that this lecture series will do these things. First, that it'll introduce newcomers to our community to Missoula's sustainability efforts and the advocates and activists that are, yay, there's Katie coming back, the activists and advocates that are trying to make sustainability a part of what Missoula is. Second, we hope it'll provide a forum for those advocates to discuss those sustainability efforts and figure out how best to refine them and make them work as well as possible. Third, we think it'll be an opportunity for all of us to just think more deeply about what sustainability means and what it can look like here in Missoula. And fourth, it'll be an opportunity to students to both learn and do at the same time, because they're going to be doing some sustainability service work as well. So Susan Anderson is a Sustainable Business Council board member, and I think kind of maybe one of the founding mothers of the Sustainable Business Council. She is also a UM adjunct professor teaching business and sustainability. She is also a small business owner in software development. And I also like to say that she's been helping me for a number of years teach students about their ecological footprints and how they can shrink those ecological footprints. And so I'm now going to turn it over to Susan to do that introduction, and please don't be disturbed by me passing out the program.
Okay. I may end up putting this down because I'm not necessarily real comfortable with microphones. And I know I can project to the back. Real quickly, I wanted to give you an introduction to SBC before I got started as well. And actually, Vicki had initially called me or emailed me with regards to putting on some sort of event in their lecture series about sustainable business and the SBC itself. And she wanted to make certain it didn't overlap with the lectures that SBC was already doing. And I said, well, hey, why don't we just do this first lecture together? And then we kind of morphed it into where we're co-sponsoring the whole event. Tonight's lecture, I would like to mention, we do have a couple additional sponsors that helped us get additional media out there and provide some extra things. We want to thank Missoula Federal Credit Union and Cherry Creek Radio and the Missoula Independent for providing us with some extra advertising that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So that was very helpful to get the word out to the public. In terms of the Sustainable Business Council, our mission is to provide education and technical assistance. Boy, did I mess that one up. Education and technical assistance to businesses, organizations, and individuals in Montana to help them adopt sustainable practices that protect and enhance the environment, the region's economy, and our local communities. In doing so, we have a number of programs. There's 3 major programs. One is our business education program, which includes this lecture tonight, another lecture series, and kind of like Vicki, I'm going to hand around some cards kind of quietly. These small cards here are for our Sustainable Shot series, which will start in November. They're once a month, November, January, February, and March. And those are designed to be small, intimate discussions with an expert. They're designed for business people and future business people who need to get key questions answered. We've done lectures in the past, and a lot of people go home saying, you know, it just was kind of a broad brush and I really need some specifics. So we've created this year our Sustainable Shot series to address that. We'll also have another lecture out in April where we're going to have the director of the U.S. U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development, Andy Mangan, will be here in April, near the end of April. So watch for that one. They'll be advertising out on that later. In addition to that, in our business education series, we also do workshops for our business members, and we hope to have one of those out to the public this next year. Part of that workshop is an assessment for businesses to figure out how they're doing in sustainability. So as a business council, we promote business education and getting people to become and to use more sustainable practices in their business. We also have our Buy Local, Buy Sustainable campaign. You may have seen some of our Buy Local logos out in people's windows. We provide those for our members, if they're local members, to let you know who in the community is local. This next year we'll be kicking off some more Buy Sustainable kind of activities where we'll also let you know who's doing a variety of different sustainability practices, and that's still in development, so I don't know exactly which practices we'll be highlighting first, but so that you'll know more about that. That information is currently going up out on our website as well, so you can go out to our website and take a look. Our third program is a community outreach program where we try and be at a lot of events around town. So we're at the Earth Day event, we're at the Sustainability Home Tour. We also tend to do a few First Fridays every year. We've been hosting green drinks on and off, which is just a time to get together and talk about sustainability in a networking kind of social situation. And then part of that community outreach is also our website, which gives you a chance to find out what's going on in the Missoula community, in the Missoula businesses. We are looking for volunteers and interns, and anybody who wants more information about the SBC, I will be outside afterwards. When Vicki kicks us out, I'll be out in the hall by the table to answer any questions you have. Our executive director, Genevieve King, unfortunately couldn't come tonight. She was scheduled to be here, and at the last minute had another engagement that she had to go to. Her phone number is 82-GREEN, not very hard to remember, so you're welcome to talk to her. I will be, I have a number of my business cards here, which has my phone number. I'm on the bottom down there, and you can certainly put Genevieve's information on the back, and I'll pass those around so you can deal with that as well. Finally, I wanted to let you know the vision that we're working with when we created our mission for the SBC. The vision that we have is that we'll have a network of vibrant local economies and caring communities that are based on renewable resources and clean, efficient practices, and that lead to a healthy environment, rewarding employment, and high quality of life. And I think that really speaks to tonight's topic about community livability and the path to sustainability. And the overall vision is that we can have communities that are still worth living in, even as we talk about how we use less resources. That based on how we develop our business community, our economies, and our social systems, we can still have a high quality of life, a quality of life that's worth living as we move forward with more sustainable practices. And our speaker tonight, Dan Kemmis, has been talking about this for quite a long time. I first heard him about 10 to 12 years ago when I first heard him speak. He'd been the mayor before that, but I first heard him speak about 10 to 12 years ago, and he was talking about sustainable ag at that time. And I've since read a number of his books and gone on, and I've been really impressed with the things he has to say about how we integrate sustainability into our systems. Currently, Dan Kemmis is the Associate of the Charles E. Kittering Foundation and a senior fellow at the Center for Natural Resources and Environmental Policy. He was working for the Center for the Rocky Mountain West here in at campus for quite a while. He is also the former mayor of Missoula and also former speaker and minority leader in the Montana House of Representatives. He has 3 excellent books out, Community and the Politics of Place, The Good City, The Good Life, which features Missoula several times. It's kind of a fun book to read if you like to hear about Missoula. And This Sovereign Land, A New Vision and for Governing, This Sovereign Land, A New Vision for Governing the West. So with that, I would like to have our speaker come up tonight, Dan Kemmis. Remind me afterwards, I'm going to throw about 4 of these very cool buy local bags out to the public. So don't let me, to those of you sitting in the audience, don't let me forget that.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks to the Sustainable Business Council for co-sponsoring this series and for asking me to be a part of it. I also want to thank the Environmental Studies Department for its co-sponsorship, and I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm looking forward to some good conversation with you after I have made a few remarks. And I do encourage you to approach it as a matter of conversation. As a pathway into that discussion, I want to focus our attention for a few minutes on a 2-word phrase, sustainable prosperity. And I want to have us think about both halves of that phrase more or less equally. So first, let me say a few words about sustainability. I'm very grateful to the people, including the sponsors of this series, who help us to see and care about the ways that our ways of living, our patterns of life are very often not sustainable. It's clear that we need to be constantly raising our awareness about that. And so I very much appreciate the people, the organizations that devote themselves to doing that. And I'm also grateful to the people who feel called into careers or businesses that also slowly and steadily reduce our impact on the environment, on the earth. We have to have more and more people doing that kind of work, pursuing those kinds of careers. And my guess is that that many of the students in the room tonight are thinking about the possibility of doing that. And I applaud that and I encourage it. Throughout this lecture series, you'll be hearing, I think, a good deal about the kinds of activities, the kinds of careers, the kinds of businesses that contribute to those important strains of the work on sustainability. But I have to warn you that that is not really my focus this evening, in part because I think you'll get a good deal of that in the lecture series as it goes on. So my focus tonight is a little bit different, maybe a little bit unexpected. I hope it's something that serves to launch this excellent series, and I hope it's something that will stir some thoughts on your part. I want to suggest another perspective on sustainability, not an alternative to the ones that I've just described, but a complement to them. And specifically, I want to ask us to think differently than we might ordinarily do about sustainability by, in the first place, thinking differently about prosperity. And to set the stage for that, I'd like to ask you to take an imaginary walk with me through a portion of downtown Missoula. And as we take this walk, I'll describe some of my impressions of the various things we'll encounter. But what I'd really encourage you to do is to think about what any of these spots or similar spots from your own hometown might mean to you. So we're going to start from my home, which is down just across the river between Kiwanis Park and the Madison Street Bridge. We'll go out from Jean's and my home up onto the riverfront trail and take a left-hand turn down to the underbridge, as it's now called, the bridge under the Madison Street Bridge. What I want to ask you to do as we take this walk is to pay attention to some of the details that if you were in a hurry you might not notice. In this case, as we go out onto that bridge, I want you to notice the beautifully sweeping cables that support it. Notice that the way that the bridge sways a little bit. Stop in the middle of the bridge and take a look at the river. Take a look at the wildlife there. If it's near sunset, watch the sunset for a while. And then when we've gone across the bridge, we'll turn right again down the river and walk down past the Hellgate practice fields. Many of us know students at Hellgate, and we might stop there if their football team is practicing and see if we can make out any of the students that we know. Go on down the river a little further to the native prairie that has been so painstakingly developed over the years. And some of you here have watched John Pierce over the years as he would go out summer after summer, kneel down, pull out the weeds, pull out the invasives, carefully plant the native plants, and try to bring that garden to a place where it really could reflect what the vegetation was in this valley before the arrival of European settlers. We might take a little detour up the hill to the Waterwise Garden, which the Natural History Center, the Native Plant Society, and Mountain Water Company, the private water company, together developed to help people see how it's possible in a valley like Missoula to do beautiful vegetation while conserving water. We go down past the Boone and Crockett Club. In my case, I remember having had my office there a couple of times in my career, but I also remember being mayor when the Boone and Crockett Club was trying to decide where to relocate its national headquarters as it got ready to leave the East Coast. And finally came to Missoula in part because there were a number of other conservation organizations here, and they thought this would be a good place to do their conservation work because they could associate with those other organizations. And so they did move their national headquarters here, now in the old Milwaukee Depot. On down the river to the Clark Fork Natural Park, and I remember when I was first mayor that's where we dumped fill dirt and snow that was removed from the streets of Missoula. There was no park there at all. In fact, all of the parks that we're talking about so far, and all of the ones we will talk about until we get back to Kiwanis Park, have been built up only in the last 30 years or so. After the Clark Fork Natural Park, we'll go under Orange Street and take a look at the skate park and recall how skateboarders in Missoula for years would skate everywhere where they weren't welcome, and they would get chased out of wherever they went. And finally, they got together, and it was the skateboarders who raised the money and put together the momentum to build what is now, I think, universally considered to be a world-class skateboard park. Cross the Orange Street Bridge now and go back down to the river to the carousel, where, again, I and many people remember all of the stories that went into carving and creating the first hand-carved carousel built in America for about 50 years, and what a wonderful community effort that was, and how wonderful it is now to watch children, some of them my age, enjoying that carousel. On up the river to Caras Park, where we just closed down the 25th consecutive season of Out to Lunch at Caras Park, and many of you are familiar with that. And then from Caras Park over to the river to take a look at Brennan's Wave, where again we have an example of young people, in this case kayakers, getting together after one of their fellow kayakers died in an accident in Chile. And they raised the money and went through all of the hoops to put together that wonderful kayak wave, which this year was the site of an international competition, and that provides tremendous excitement and entertainment for the kayakers, but also entertainment for thousands of us who don't kayak but love to stop by. We could go then back under the Higgins Street Bridge, and if it were a Saturday in the summertime or the spring or the fall, we'd come across the Clark Fork Farmers Market. Very busy, very active farmers market, providing an outlet for farmers, gardeners, ranchers, one of two wonderful farmers markets in Missoula. And right next to it is the bronze fish play sculpture that you can watch children playing on. They never get tired of it. On up the river to Bess Reed Park beside the Holiday Inn, and in my case and that of a few others in the audience, we remember who Bess Reed was, remember her contributions to education in Montana. There we have to take a little detour away from the river, but it's a pleasant detour as we go up this very carefully designed little passageway called a wooner, which allows cars to pass but tells them in every way it can, this is really a passageway for pedestrians and bicyclists. And cars are guests on the wooner. We go back onto the trail then at Kiwanis Park, which, as I mentioned, is the only park of this, in that whole string, that whole necklace of parks that even existed on the riverfront 30 years ago. So think none of the trails were there, only one park. None of what I have described was there 30 years ago. And back home. So what have we seen on this little tour of the riverfront? Well, I want to suggest that what we have seen is a prosperous city becoming more prosperous in increasingly sustainable ways. So first, let me talk about what I mean by prosperity here. And as I mentioned at the beginning, what I want to suggest is that we give ourselves the opportunity to think of prosperity in a different way than we might ordinarily do. So what I mean by prospering in this case is that we have encountered a community that is thriving in a large number of ways, a number of ways that overlap and reinforce each other. So let's just think for a minute about the thriving, the prospering that we've encountered on this walk. Some of it is physical, just the fact that we're out walking and that other people are out running or bicycling means that we're a healthier city than we would have been otherwise. So we're thriving, we're prospering more than we would have, more than we once did, because of those trails and parks. But that physical activity, of course, is nothing like what the skateboarders are doing or the kayakers. And so there's a slightly higher level of physical prospering going on in those spots. But there's also a social prospering or thriving that's going on. We meet people on the trail. Very often we meet people that we know. Even if we don't, we meet strangers and on a good day say hello to them and nod at them or smile at them. Those social interactions are tremendously important to the health of a community. And there is a cultural prospering. Among other things, as the trail gives us an opportunity to engage in memories, the memories of Bess Reed, the memories of what was there, the memories of the Milwaukee Road itself. And I'd suggest that for those that are inclined to think along these lines, that the prospering that goes on is also very often a spiritual prospering and thriving. No matter how you might define spirit, that there is a deepening of spiritual connection and of spiritual experience. So in all of these ways, what Missoula has done and what many other communities have done is to make a more prosperous community. Now, I've gone through all those ways of prospering without even talking about economics. But I want to make it very clear that I think that with what we've done along the riverfront, with the downtown, that it's been tremendously important to the economic prospering of Missoula as well. During the last 20 to 25 years, the economies of most Western communities have changed substantially as they've moved away from almost a sole reliance on natural resource extraction. And some of those communities that lost mills or lost mines have suffered, but most of them have not. Most of them, like Missoula, are stronger economically than they were in the heyday of the natural resource industries. And why is that? Well, there's one very clear reason, one clear economic driver that has pushed economic prosperity throughout at least the Rocky Mountain West over the 20 years. And that economic driver is the livability of the communities in which those economies have grown. Almost without exception, the communities that have become the strongest economically, the communities that have diversified their economic base most broadly, are the ones that have provided exactly the kinds of amenities that we encountered on that walk. They are the communities that provide a good place to live, a good place to work, a good place to raise a family. And when we talk about the role of livability as an economic driver, it brings us around to the role that businesses have very often played in creating the kinds of amenities that we're talking about here. So almost none of what I've described would have happened had there not been local businesses that were making contributions to the skate park or to the kayak wave, or providing volunteers to help with the trails and parks. Out to Lunch at Caras Park has been entirely driven by the Missoula Downtown Association. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that on the one hand, livability has become a hugely important economic driver in communities like this, but secondly, that many businesses which don't necessarily think in terms of sustainability are at least contributing in substantial and important ways to the promotion of this feature of livability. So are they, in the course of doing that, promoting sustainability as well? Well, I want to suggest that they are, and I want to turn our attention now from prosperity to sustainability. And what I want to suggest is that this way of viewing prosperity, or more important, this way of living prosperously that I've been talking about, contributes to sustainability. In fact, I would be willing to argue that nothing so reliably contributes to sustainability as these features of livability. I would want to argue that it's very, very difficult to make the kind of progress that we need to make on issues of sustainability simply by trying to persuade people to do with less or to change their lifestyle in order to save the earth. There are people, thank goodness, who are willing to do that. But if that's the only approach that we had available to us to move in the direction of sustainability, I am very dubious about whether we could get there. But the good news from my perspective is that we do more to contribute to sustainability by making our communities highly livable than in any other way. Why do I say that? Well, let's just take a few minutes looking again at what we've been talking about in terms of this kind of prospering, this kind of prosperity. what we see, I think, when a community really begins to put together these different elements of prosperity, we see a broadening of the lived definition of the good life. We see people understanding that what the good life is about is exactly those kinds of things that we've been talking about, and many others, but that the good life is not about consuming, it's not about buying, it's not even about being rich or being wealthy in most of the ways that we have tended to think that the good life is about, but rather what people can experience in the kind of community that we've been fortunate to put together here and continue to work on, but in many other places as well. What people can experience is a whole different notion of what constitutes the good life. And what's so important about it is that the features of that good life, almost without exception, are tremendously satisfying to people, and they do not require unsustainable kinds of consumption or other activities. One way of thinking about what this kind of prospering might mean is that by contrast to the economy as we usually conceive of it, this kind of prospering is focused on being, not buying. It's focused on being, not buying, on being well together. Now that certainly is not to deny the importance of making a living. We all have to make a living, and that means that we have to work, we have to generate economic activity, and so on. But one thing that this way of thinking about prosperity does is to make us aware that when we talk about making a living, that the living is at least as important as the making. That really, if we're not focusing on living well, then you begin to question what's making a living really all about. And also, it helps us to understand what I've already referred to, and that is how livability serves as an economic engine. Well, let's think just a little bit harder about that. As the economy of our whole society has begun to shift gradually away from such a heavy dependence on manufacturing and in the direction of producing wealth through creative activities, what we find, almost without exception, is that the highly creative people, or even the only moderately creative people, who contribute so much to that kind of economy, those people, by and large, want to live in a place that sustains them, that not only sustains them economically, but sustains them in all the ways that I have talked about. And because so many of those people are able to live wherever they choose and do their creative work wherever they choose, they gravitate to places that provide the kind of broad-based prosperity that I've been talking about here. And so those places prosper. But what I want to do now is to apply some of those concepts to where we are right now in Missoula, and in particular to use this as a way of maybe taking a different kind of look at the subject that you'll be examining in your next session of this lecture series, this most recent effort of Missoula with economic development the Best Place project. And I want to just raise some questions about the way that we're approaching that. Not because I fail to appreciate the effort that's gone into it. And certainly I appreciate the leadership that the mayor and many of our civic and business leaders have provided. Given the effect of the recession on Missoula, given the closure of the pulp mill west of town, given the closure of Macy's downtown, given the closure of many other businesses, it would be irresponsible for the leaders of the community not to ask, what do we need to be doing to continue to build prosperity in our city? And so whatever I have to say here is said against the background of appreciation for that kind of leadership. But as Mayor Engen and some of the other leaders know, I and some of the rest of us have been skeptical from the beginning about the idea of hiring outside consultants, in this case from Atlanta, to come and help Missoula understand what it should be doing. And while I appreciate the leadership of the business leaders who have stepped forward to take responsibility for this effort, I think that it behooves us as a community to ask whether we're going in exactly the right direction with this effort. And what concerns me most strongly, those of you who may have read the Missoulians' report of this effort recently, will see that the focus of the effort, at least as it's being presented right now, is to try to figure out how to get Missoula's average income to the same level as the national average, or the average of any Montana cities that may have a higher average income. Now you might ask, what's wrong with that? Well, first of all, I have no objection to higher incomes. I wouldn't object to higher income for myself. So it's not that I object to the idea of higher incomes. But I think that focusing an economic development effort solely on trying to raise average incomes is problematic in a number of ways. I think it's economically problematic, and I think it can be quite problematic in terms of sustainability. First of all, it's so easy to make invidious and misleading comparisons when you start talking about average income. The fact of the matter is that almost without exception, metropolitan areas have higher average income than cities that are more remote from those metropolitan areas. And there's no secret about that. Metropolitan areas just have bigger economic engines. They therefore create more wealth in terms of income. And so it's just a statistical fact of life that metropolitan areas have higher incomes than non-metropolitan areas. And a place like Missoula is about as far from a large metropolitan area as you can get. You have to go about 500 miles in any direction to get to a large metropolitan area. So in a sense, it's just in the cards that Missoula has always had, and until we become a large metropolitan area, are likely always to have a somewhat lower average income than other places. And there's another factor in Missoula's case that I think is very important and frankly very healthy. And that is that Missoula is a place that attracts a lot of young people, many of them to come to the university, but not only to come to the university. Now, in terms of earning power, it's again just a simple fact of life that young people generally earn less than older people. That's sort of the way it works. And so the fact that Missoula has a lower average income is largely driven by our distance from metropolitan areas and by the fact that we're attractive to young people. And there's more to it than that. There is the fact that people move to Missoula and stay in Missoula because of the elements of prosperity that I talked about earlier. And not infrequently, people are willing to give up a certain amount of cash income for the other kinds of income that they get from living in a place like Missoula. Another problem that I see with setting a goal of trying to raise Missoula to the national average is that it's an unreachable goal for the reasons that I've talked about. And it's not politically healthy to set yourselves goals that you can't reach. You're better off setting goals that you've got some chance of reaching. But the most important concern that I have about this approach is simply that keeping up with the Joneses is not a very good path to sustainability. That if what everybody is trying to do is to have a place as nice as the place across the street or across the state or across the country in terms of raw economic measures like income, that is a serious bar to moving in the direction of greater sustainability. And it's a problem that goes even deeper than that. It's a problem of forgetting who you are. It's like an individual who tries to be somebody else. It doesn't work. It's not healthy. It's not a good idea. So I've been a little harsh on the way that the Good Place Project or Best Place Project has been framed so far. There are many very positive elements to it, and you'll get a chance to explore those. But to my mind, part of the value of this kind of series is to get us to think harder about where we are and where we're going. And so I've tried to present an opportunity to that. To me, what it all comes down to is that it's too easy to get distracted from what it is that's most important, most sustaining, most fulfilling, what it is that genuinely contributes to human prospering. Distraction, I think, is a great enemy of prospering and of sustainability. Just think about it for a minute. Think about the fact that the more a society is distracted, the more it needs to distract itself, the more likely it is to put its energy into unsustainable activities. And conversely, the more present we are, the more we're willing to be here, to recognize the value of what we have, the lighter the burden that we put on the earth. So let me close my comments with a parable from one of my favorite sages and some advice from a favorite prophet. First, the parable from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. in which the White Queen offers Alice some jam tomorrow. And Alice is dubious about it. The Queen says, "Oh, it's very good jam." And Alice says, "Well, I know I don't want any today." "Oh," the Queen said, "you couldn't have it today if you did want it. The rule is jam tomorrow and jam yesterday, but never jam today." "Well, it must come sometime to jam today," Alice objected. "No, it can't," said the Queen. "It's jam every other day. Today isn't any other day, you know." "Oh, I don't understand you," said Alice. "It's dreadfully confusing." Well, I think it is confusing. And I think that very often when we try to improve our world or improve our communities, that we sort of get into the no jam today mentality. If we're always focused on the way things once were or the way they might be, then we never pay attention to the way they are now. And if we don't pay attention to the way they are now, then we simply don't appreciate what we have, and we remove ourselves from being able to live as well as we might. That's the essence of distraction. Now, I'll give another example of distraction. This is a little pet peeve of mine. I talked earlier about people on the trail on a good day saying hello to each other or smiling at each other. I love it when people do that. But all too often it seems to me that I encounter people on the trail, even when we're the only two within a block or two, who don't say hello, who don't acknowledge me. And I wonder, what's that all about? Aren't we in this same place together, in this same time? So here's my advice. If you want to really make a contribution to the sustainability of this community, just do a few things. One, when you meet somebody on the trail, unless there's some good reason to not say hello, say hello. Share the wealth. Share the wealth that you bring. Be present. Not to do that is to waste one of the greatest gifts that we have, being here now. So be present to your neighbors. Then when you've got to buy something, which we all do all the time, whenever possible, buy from your neighbors. And the Sustainable Business Council will help you figure out who they are. It's a good way to engage in the economic activity that we all have to engage in. Buy some jam. Buy some huckleberry jam. And don't save it all for tomorrow. Have some of it today. And finally, the words from one of my favorite prophets who happened to be in town last night, Bob Dylan, from the ballad of Frankie and Johnny. This is the last verse. I had it written down, but I left it over there, so we'll see how this goes. So the moral of this story, the moral of this song, is simply that one should never be where one does not belong. So when you see your neighbor carrying something, help him with his load. And don't go mistaking paradise for that home across the road. Shalom. All right, now, the Kemmis rules are that I don't do question and answer, although if it comes to that, we'll do it. But I'd much rather have a discussion. So if you've got something to say, as long as you're briefer than I was, you can say it. If somebody else says something and you've got a response to it, you can do that. And if you do want to ask a question, that's fine. And if I think I've got an answer, well, I'll give it my best shot. But if somebody asks a question and you've got the answer, then you do it, okay? So with those rules, what's on anybody's mind? Professor Chesson. Mike, can you stand up and talk to the back of the room? You don't necessarily have to face that way, but let's, because I don't want it.
Experience doing that while teaching here for 41 years.
Yes.
So I suppose I can do it. Well, it's been some time since I've done that. I first want to say, Dan, that I'm not sure that we understood enough about what your contributions have been to the life of Missoula, and particularly to the good life. You mentioned a few items. I think open space, certainly you must have played a very large role in that. I just wanted to say that I'm one of the people that has benefited very strongly from having that kind of livability that you and others created. So I wanted to thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Mike.
And now for my comment, and I know you want me to be somewhat sharp.
It would shock me too much if you weren't.
And I try to be brief, although it's a little difficult. What you have described is a life for those of us who live in Missoula, Montana, and Rocky Mountain West. And for one thing, there aren't too many of our fellow citizens around the country who have that kind of advantage to begin with, although, you know, it can perhaps provide a model for wherever you are. But I know we're in a special situation in that regard. But my major concern is whether this goal of sustainability, in the terms that you described, is possible on a national scale, where we have a corporate control of our economy, which has produced a recession like no other that we've had for many years. And I think that they are also responsible for the dysfunctional political system through their contributions in determining the makeup of our legislatures. And I think that's most obvious in the case of the U.S. Senate, which has just completely fallen into disrepair when it comes to doing things that this country needs to do. And I don't want to go into any more detail than that on that score. They're also, to a large extent, responsible for certain media that produce misinformation on a large scale, which has influenced a significant, I hope, minority of our population to the point where they seem to have no clue as to who is responsible for the fear and the frustration that they feel.
Well, Mike, let's just put that out there. I could give my response to it, but I think it's something that needs to be said, certainly needs to be thought about, and I'll welcome responses to it. But at the very least, I think it's important that that be in people's minds as we think about these issues of sustainability. But having said that, if it's all right, I'm going to let that stand as a powerful statement. Vicki?
I thank you for reminding us about some of the things that make Missoula such a great place to live, and I wanted to just mention some of the things that make it a great place to live for me. And one of those is that it ought to be called the volunteer capital of the world. I love the way Missoulians pitch in and work to restore our landscape, work to raise money to do things. And I do want to throw out a little advertisement, is that the right word? For the Five Valleys Land Trust has gotten an option on the land to finish the Kim Williams Trail all the way to the confluence of the two rivers. And so I urge everybody here to give at least $5, if that's all you feel you can afford, or whatever you can afford, to the Five Valleys Land Trust, so that every time you walk along the Kim Williams Trail, you can say, I helped complete the Kim Williams Trail. We've heard of the examples of the Brendan's Wave and the skate park, and people worked hard to bring those to us. And a lot of times it was just a lot of people would just put in $5 or more if they could afford it. And so you can help make another wonderful contribution to Missoula by contributing to that. But we do so much in Missoula to try to make the place just more desirable to live, but also more affordable. The farmers markets help people get low-cost, really good food. Every now and then, our energy company pays to buy a lot of weatherization materials, and volunteers step forward and take those weatherization materials and go out to low-income homes and weatherize them for the winter. Those kind of volunteer activities, I guess Missoula already does, and I think needs to think more about, instead of raising incomes, lowering the cost of living here wherever it can. Because often you lower the cost of living, by reducing consumption of energy, by reducing consumption of food that comes from far away, you're also shrinking everybody's ecological footprint. So to encourage Missoula to come up, think about all those kinds of ideas, the way that we can work together to make it more affordable for low-income people, but also more affordable for everybody to have a smaller ecological footprint. And if any place can do it, it's Missoula, the volunteer capital of the world.
Thanks, Vicki. Yes, Jason.
Thanks for your talk. I had a comment that Mike's comment sort of resonated with me. But my question to you was, what was the role of the public sector, the government, in creating all of those things that you talked about on your walk? And I bring that up not just because we too often take for granted how government creates the conditions for us to prosper, but also because that the main tools of that, regulation and taxes, are under a withering attack. And while I appreciate that you give credit to the businesses that had the foresight to be part of the vision of Missoula's prosperity that's come to bear, the main voice of business is the Chamber of Commerce, and they do nothing but denigrate government. And I mean, even the Sustainable Business Council is a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and at the national level, they're spending $75 million this year to buy Congress. So I think we've got to talk about the good things that government does, because without regulation and taxes, we don't get values represented other than more is better, and we don't get projects done that fund the vision of prosperity that you're talking about.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Jason. It's a very important point, and obviously I was putting a little bit more emphasis on the private contributions to some of what has been accomplished, but of course you're absolutely right that in many cases the parks, the trails, even the kayak wave and the skate park, all of them had public contributions, in some cases substantial financial contributions, in many cases leadership and contributions from members of city government and so on. So that's a very important observation. I think what has struck me about the sorts of things that I talked about is how often they have been genuine public and private partnerships, that the private sector and the public sector have worked together in a very effective way. And given the fact that it does not seem to be in our future that we're going to see any vast expansion of public resources anytime soon, I think it becomes tremendously important that we look for those opportunities to have partnerships between the public sector and private sector, either the way that Vicki is talking about, through volunteerism, which is tremendously important, or through other kinds of partnering. But I guess the other thing that I might say about that is that even in order to have an effective public sector, you need more than good elected officials like you or Mayor Engen or others. You need more than people voting for good elected officials. You need some sense that through government, through volunteering, through philanthropy, in all of these ways together, that we're building a better community and a better world. And when I talk about the kind of thriving that I think we see in a strong community, the one kind of thriving I did not mention, the one kind of prospering, the one kind of health is political or civic health. And I'm convinced that everything that we have done together in Missoula has made us stronger civically, which then creates the political base to enable you to do the good work that you do. Without that strong civic base, it would be very hard for government to do its good work. So I think these things fit together in that way. Yes.
I'd like to key up, all of these comments are good and your lecture was brilliant. I just think it was so well done. But I worked in the Office of Planning and Grants for a very long time. I'm retired now, and Karen Warrington. I just think that, just keying off what you said about volunteers in Missoula, I worked in human services. And I was a senior grants administrator. I worked in the arena mostly of domestic and sexual violence, did a lot of program development in the community. And what I'd like to say is that Missoula, what you said is exactly right, that I think this is the best community, that I'd seen in many national conferences I went to, and just we got a lot of feedback on that we have the most nonprofits in the country, and I think that, that's our reputation, and I think that that's true in terms of the drive and the energy here is if there's a problem, you say this is a problem on Tuesday, and by Thursday you have 16 people sitting there working on it, and I've seen that over and over and over. And we have built, in my time, since the late 70s until I retired a couple of years ago, we built a very strong, sustainable network of services for domestic and sexual violence, and for many other human services. Even though there are problems and they grow exponentially every year, but we still built this system largely locally. We use federal funds, but we also use local funds, state funds, and just the energy, the volunteerism, the will here to get things done. And so I think that fits in with what you're saying, what you were saying.
Thank you.
We just get it done here.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Okay. Yes, it's Molly. Hi, Molly.
I wanted to mention an institution I'm trying to bring back. And many of you know it as Grace Feed. And if you don't know it's Grace Feed, It's a building over on 1221 Helen. It's just a block off of Arthur between Cloud and University. And it's an old building.
Could you speak up, please?
It's an old building that has had a market in it since 1950. And the best example of that was this place called Freddy's Beanery. And our motto was, Freddy's didn't have it, we didn't need it. It had books, it had deli, it had milk, which everybody knows that about half, and produce, fresh produce, and bread. It was the most fabulous little store. And it built community around in the neighborhood. You walked to it, you got to meet your neighbors. It was kid-friendly. My children had a charge account. They knew exactly, all the store people worked there knew what my children were not to have. It was a great place, and I'm trying to redo it, and it's called Butter. I'm calling it Butter, which was my grandmother's name, because she was a local who worked before that ever came about. We're going to be selling beer and wine for off-site consumption. We'll have dairy, we'll have bakery, we will have a deli, we will have your coffee. We will be open 7 to 6 daily. We're in the process of getting building permits. We need help from the government to get through. We will not be selling books because books are more perishable than lettuce. Our hope is to be sort of like a farmer's market all year long within the neighborhood. And I hope that you will follow our progress, and I welcome you all when we open up. So.
Thank you, Molly. Great news. Yes.
I'm in charge of the city's open space program, which means we acquire parks and trails and open space. And so it was wonderful to hear how you described how important those things are to quality of life, not only in Missoula, but to any city across the United States. And there was just some things, the way that you articulated them, that I just really appreciated. I hadn't quite heard them put in that way before, and so I just wanted to repeat a couple of them. When you were saying this type of prospering is focused on being well and participating and enjoying the community, and participating in that community versus material goods. And I can't think of a place in the United States that allows you to do that more than in Missoula, as everybody's already reinforced. But you just articulated it in a way I hadn't heard it, so thanks very much.
Thank you. All right. Yes.
Can we talk about jobs
About jobs.
and lack of?
Well, first of all, I think that that over the last 3 decades that Missoula has substantially diversified its economic base, so that we became less dependent than we once were on a few main industries. I think we're all disappointed by the Stone Containers decision to shut down the mill, which were some of the last really high-paying industrial jobs in Missoula. And yet that decision had been on the horizon for a very long time, and was probably almost inescapable. I think that Missoula, like any other community, has to be constantly aware of the challenge of generating economic activity that in turn can generate jobs. But I think that Missoula has actually done relatively well in those terms. And as people like Tom Power have pointed out, very often when you have a highly livable community, you have people moving there who don't have jobs, who are hoping to find jobs because they want to be there. And so with that kind of community, you are almost always going to have a certain level of unemployment. It's not what I would call voluntary unemployment. People would like to have jobs, all right. And let's hope that most of them can find jobs. But actually, a lot of what we've heard here, I think, about the rich civic culture, the fact that, I think it was Leslie talked about how per capita we have such a high level of nonprofits. Now, those nonprofits almost always employ people. They don't often pay a whole lot, but they do employ people. Why do we have so many nonprofits? Well, one of the reasons, I think, is because people come here because they want to be here, and they do know they have to make a living, and very often when they can't find a job in the normal employment market, what they do is they figure out something that they really think ought to be happening, and they create a nonprofit and they do it themselves. So there's a tremendous amount of self-generated employment that goes on here. So that, now what I should have done before I launched into that is to ask you, what do you mean by your question and why do you raise it? Because you wouldn't have brought it up if you weren't concerned.
I think the people in this room are advantaged, and there are a lot of people in the city who aren't.
Yep.
And there's a gap between people who can afford sustainability and people who can't. And people who can afford to buy organic food and people who can't.
Can you speak up, please?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm just talking about the gap between people who are advantaged and can afford sustainability and those in this city who can't. And how sustainability and jobs work together. How can you bridge that gap?
Good. I wish I had asked you earlier, because those are really important questions, and they're questions that I'd invite others to weigh in on as well. Yes, Terry?
I don't heard kind of the answer to that. I have kind of a comment question regarding when you describe people that can't afford sustainability or those that can. In some of the reading I've done, it seems like, particularly in developing nations, they've determined they can't afford not to act sustainably. And when we discuss a choice of that, what you're talking about, of acting sustainably or not, I have a different understanding, I guess, of that, in that if we're looking at the long-term, long-term sustainability, we can't afford not to. Now, how that comes about it's not like somebody deciding whether they can afford a hybrid car or not. That I obviously understand, but in general, in terms of sustainability, what we do as a community, the political actions that we take for our community, for our own life and stuff, how can we not afford it? I mean, we're going to kill ourselves.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100% that we can't afford not to live sustainably. But there is a big gap between my understanding and, say, somebody who has to shop at Walmart because that's all they can afford. And how do you transfer that message? How do you get from where, say, you and I agree to where you're dealing with people who don't agree with that? And one of the big parts of that is job availability.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely, and it plays into the political difficulties. Then, if you have a lot of people who feel that, in fact, policies that move us in more sustainable directions are going to be too much of a burden on them or their families, they're not going to support them. So it's tremendously important that we deal with the kinds of issues that you're talking about. I'll just give one little example that to me is hopeful. We've talked about the various nonprofits in Missoula. One of my favorites is Homeward, which does affordable housing, but they do green housing, and in a very concerted and determined way. There's an example of trying to bridge that gap. Now let's see, are we running out of time, Vicki?
We can probably take a couple more questions and comments. I see somebody who works really hard to provide affordable transportation. Bob Giordano up there at the top of his hand up.
Hi, Bob.
My reaction to my notion that the corporations are an obstacle, I can agree with that, but also see the real value of citizens doing things in their own community. But then, listening to this last question, affording these things, I think of that sort of famous statistic where a head of lettuce would be about $11 or $13 if it came from California without oil subsidies. So it really makes me think, flipping back a little bit, that changing oil subsidies and being involved in some of the big national policy things is critical if we want people to be able to afford a carrot from the peach farm. And that should be, a lot cheaper than something that's shipped from Chile or California or whatever. So on one hand, yeah, we're local, we're here, we're together, but on the other, if there's these huge forces that are throwing our community off, we have to do something about that. How do we do that?
Yes.
I just want to quickly add a few things in regards to your comment, and it doesn't matter what income level you're at, there's just so many things that you can do at every income level to be sustainable. For instance, if you don't, let's say you have one of the lower incomes in Missoula, I mean, you can use less energy in your home. That's going to save you money. You can recycle and reuse products, buy secondhand. That's going to save you money. You can reduce your consumerism and maybe rethink of what you're buying and saying, do I really need this, or can I borrow it from somebody if it's something I'm only going to use twice a year? You can ride your bike, you can ride the bus. And there's just so many ways to be sustainable at no matter what income level you're at, whether you're a student or any income level. That's why I just want to add to that.
All right.
I was going to add to those comments that it always seems strange that we manage to find the money to resurface the streets and build new roads and so on and so forth. Anything for the car, we always seem to be able to find money for. But Missoula badly needs something like a sustainability center where people can come and can their own food and borrow tools and so on and so forth. That's sort of a place. A community center with affordable venues for community groups to put on affordable dances and concerts and events where people don't have to pay an arm and a leg to go to, for their local community entertainment. So we can save money, help people save money on entertainment, on food by providing a place where they can their food. We've got free cycles that Bob Giordano up there runs. We have some things that people can use to be both sustainable and affordable, but we really need to figure out how to invest more of our public funds in things like sustainability centers with that sort of view. It's interesting, we're still building McMansions. People are still cocooning in McMansions and objecting to paying taxes so that we can build some community infrastructure that would help everyone. Not only would it help low-income people, but we just had some people visit us from New Orleans who are doing some very interesting things in terms of pairing up people who have, some people have large yards that could be turned into gardens, but they're getting too elderly to do that, and then they pair them up with lower income people who have no yard, but who have got the energy to come and turn other people's yards into a garden and be sharecroppers on somebody else's yard. So all these kind of interesting ideas of putting together, people complementing one another in terms of what you've got land, I've got muscle, let's get together. So we're trying to come up with some of those kind of ideas.
Well, John here and I are both on the board of MUD, and so something I'm working on already. One of the things that is new to Missoula is 1,000 new gardens, and they're doing exactly what you're talking about as far as joining people together with gardens, people who have land, people who don't. They go out and they dig people's gardens for them so they can start gardening. So I'm aware of those things, but still have that job problem.
This is a great introduction to the Sustainability Lecture Series because we're going to have people from MUD here. We're going to have Bob talking about free cycles and mist, and just a whole host of the people who are already doing some of these kinds of things are going to be here in later Sustainability Series. So let's get one more comment and then we ought to wrap it up.
Yeah, my comment is just about, I guess, our purchasing power. And you made the comment about Walmart and things being cheaper, but I would say less than 5 years ago, Walmart didn't offer organic things. But because of the purchasing power and the decisions that we've made, either at the Good Food Store, at Safeway, at Albertsons, whatever, has forced corporate America to make more sustainable choices at their level, which means the farms are becoming more organic. I mean, there's a trickle effect that is becoming more universal and more affordable. Organic produce and options are available at more affordable prices for different levels because of the choices that people have made all along. And I think that when I think about purchasing things, it goes into it. It's that piece of sustainability that I use my purchasing power to make that decision so that it is available for everyone else.
Well, just remember there was one thing I was going to ask everybody to do, and that was to say their name and maybe something that's a little bit descriptive of them, so that this is a great opportunity for people to connect. And a lot of us who have been here forever already know each other, but for the young folks here to learn who some folks are. So help me remember to suggest that in the future, that everybody kind of identifies themselves as they're giving their comments. Because we have a wealth of, what we have here is a lot of thoughtful brain power and a lot of young muscle power, and I'd like to get those things together. So let's thank our speaker.